You really don't believe me on this one?
I think you're exaggerating.
I'm going to show you and everyone watching what Magnus Carlsen just did. He was white in this game, playing against Jan-Krzysztof Duda, Polish #1, Super Grandmaster. It's the Superbet Rapid and Blitz, day 5. Magnus Carlsen trying to win every game. What he turned on here was incredible. More detail on that to come. First, let's dive into the chess, because what Magnus plays here is very rare and dubious at the top level. He picks up his B pawn and pushes it forward. A Benko gambit, but with colours reversed. Duda gratefully accepts, and now Magnus raises a second pawn here. Duda captures that one, shouts gobble gobble as he does so. So many of the top professionals do when they eat 2 pawns, and after castles, knight c6, d3, Magnus isn't even rushing the recapture. It's gonna drop anyway, and meantime Duda's just taking the centre here. Still the pawn not taken. Magnus goes queen a4. He's pinning this knight and therefore threatening to take on e5. So bishop d7 breaks the pin and Magnus just takes here. Isn't there a tactic? The bishop's lined up with the queen. Well, no, there's no good squares for this to really hop to. So instead we see takes on a3. Magnus recaptures, scything down this important diagonal, and so queen e7 played, intercepting. Magnus just carries on developing. Duda chops off the ladies. We're into an endgame. Magnus territory. He starts bleating. King e7 now played, connecting the rooks. Rook b1, eyeballing the pawn, and the silicon overlord wants rook h to b8. Excuse me. But rook a b8 was played instead to cover that pawn here, and watch this manoeuvring. It's truly masterful. Magnus picks up the knight, plonks it back on e1, knight e1, ne1. There's a chess notation joke. He opens up the eyes of the bishop, and after rook hc8, he can technically win a pawn. You know, you can crash through here. Why didn't Magnus go for this kind of variation? Well, black gets very active. You're probably going to win the pawn back, or at the best case here, it's just level, material restored. Magnus wants more. He's got to win. He's chasing Wei Yi. So he plays knight c2, a6 now from Duda, and this is such a classy move. He picks up the f-pawn and pushes it forward, trying to break up this black centre. And that is the reason that we don't see captures here. Because although the white pawn structure is compromised, knight h5 could come. Well, this rook covers the pawn. Meantime, knight b3 is on the cards, and this one comes under tremendous pressure. So that's why knight g4 from Duda. Excellent move. If pawn h3, you chase the knight in here. It's what black wants. An exchange helps. Frees up the d4 square for this one. Whoops. So this one was played instead. Now knight g takes on e5. Knight b3, still a good move, going after the pawn. This time though, b5 gives good counterplay. The knight's on the c4 pawn, and so Magnus hops back this way. We see an exchange with check. Bishop recaptures, and now the b5 move that we just discussed. Important break. Yes, you leave this one loose, but there's lots of pressure here. So Magnus chops off on c6. Why would he give such a wonderful piece? Well, this is the point. He picks up the central pawn, restores material. Duda slides into d6, hits the knight, e3 covers, and now c5 is a threat. That c-pawn gets really deadly, running in a more dangerous manner than these two, which are quite well controlled. That is why Duda now gives back material just to cover the c5 threat. We won't click down all the alternatives. This is what's played. It's blitz chess, and Duda's like 3 minutes down on the clock already. Craziness. C takes on b5, played by Magnus. He gratefully accepts the pawn. He's now a pawn ahead, having been a pawn down earlier on. What play from the world number one? Duda goes rook b6, pin and win here, and after Magnus doubles the rooks, you can do this, but knight d4 always on tap to cover this one. No issues tactically. So Duda goes rook c2, gets the invasion going. This is what he was aiming for when he gave the pawn. Knight d4 back, hitting the rook. We see an exchange on b3, rook recaptures, and rook d2. Such an active piece, giving the compensation for the pawn. Knight f3, Magnus desperate to kick it out of his house, pushing forward the e-pawn now. f6 played, keeping an eye on this square. Natural pawn structure with the light squared bishop. King f1, trying to get rid of the rook, but it's not going anywhere. Rook b7, king d6, h4. Now the knight free to move, but after pawn h6, Magnus doesn't move the knight. If you start going knight d4, well, rook d2 comes, hitting the pawn. You know, it's not easy to unravel. So Magnus goes for this one with king e1, allowing rook g2, then d4, allowing this pawn to drop. What's Magnus got in mind? Well, now the king gets out of the box. It can enter the game. Such an important attacking piece in the endgame. And after rook g4, you have to tread so carefully. But these guys on top of it. What happens if king e3? There's a tactical problem here. You haven't actually defended the pawn. Not adequately, because rook takes, king takes, and you wander into this skewer here, or fork, or whatever the hell it's called, and then the rook is dropping off the board. So that one not played. Magnus pushes forward. Pawn takes, not takes, sorry, got it wrong. King sidesteps. Now we see the rook moving away from the attack. Bishop e6, important defensive maneuver, and after rook a6 check, things are already very tricky for Duda. If he steps up to d5, then rook d6 comes, check, and the bishop drops. So that's why king d7, but now a great move from Magnus. A variation on the theme. He pushes forward with the pawn. Yes, it's unprotected, but if captures, this big check is coming. But what else to do? If you go bishop f5, then Magnus has these pleasant choices. e6 check is one, or you can take on f6, pick up a pawn here. It's really dangerous. So Duda plays the top way to play here, top engine move. He does capture the pawn, giving up a piece, but after the rook captures, he's got two pawns for that piece. Magnus has only got one left, and if you can liquidate it, this should be a theoretical draw. Knight and rook against rook. This is what Duda's aiming for. This pawn now drops with check, king f6, rook a5 back, and there's a problem here. You really want to go pawn g5. Get these ones off the board like this. But h5 is the problem. Magnus can keep the pawns on, the knight covers this square, and where to go from here? White has advantage. It's not easy to round up this pawn. So that's why Duda goes full oasis and slides away with rook b4. King g3 now played. Rook b3. Pin and win on that knight. We get this check. The king wanders up. Now pawn h5. There's a nice barrier here. The king can't make progress. Rook c3, rook g6, going after the g7 pawn, and rook c7 defends it. Top-notch commentary on Epic Chess. If you're not yet subscribed, do smash that button. Never miss a recap. Knight d4 check now. King e5 played, and knight e2, covering this checking square so the rook can't get there. That's why king f5, rook king f3 and rook b7 now played to find a new checking square. But Magnus just in time with this one. Knight e5 comes, king e5 sorry, king e3 now, rook b1 coming in behind, but you can see that Stockfish just poops its pants. Why is it such a big advantage? Well, Magnus had this maneuver, not easy to find. The knight spinning around to the h-file with check in this particular line, and then when the pawn drops, rook h1, hitting two things. Well, this one comes back, covers the knight, king boxed out. Awesome variation, white winning. But Magnus misses it, plays the most natural move in the world, taking the g pawn, but now rook h1. How are you saving the h pawn? Well, Magnus comes up with this awesome idea, rook a7, and it's a trap. A cunning one. Not that cunning actually. It's kind of shallow. One move threat. If you take, then there's this skewer, you lose the rook. So you can't touch the pawn. It's immune. That's why we get the check. But knight f3 blocks, counter check. Aha, you always unlock a medal if you can block a check with a counter check. Very nice. Magnus happy. But after king f5, king g4 is coming, and what do you do to prevent it? Once the king gets there, the knight's dropping or the pawn's dropping, and if you go here to block it out, well then of course rook takes here, the pawn is just dropping. So Magnus desperately throws in a check. Duda goes king g4, knight's dropping, what to do? Magnus checks again, and now here, inexplicably, Duda does not take the free pawn on offer. But it should be known, rumour has it that at this moment, a smell, a waft, an aroma entered the hall. A herring stand had just been opened nearby the venue. Air vents were on full whack. That aroma made its way in. Duda was hit with pure brain fog. He couldn't execute on the move, went king f5, didn't gobble the pawn, and now there's a check here. The king is driven back. It can't come to any of these squares here. I wasn't just playing a giant game of Tetris. King e6 played, now rook h4, the rooks can't leave the board or it's a lost endgame. So rook g3, king f4, rook g8, rook g4, and after check, king e4 here, rook a8, Magnus now invades with the rook and picks up Duda's pawn after this sequence of moves. It's move 66, Duda has seen enough, he gets crunched in an endgame by Magnus Carlsen. Just incredible. And Magnus went the unprecedented 10 in a row victories in Blitz games. Just unheard of. He won the whole tournament. Congrats to him. I'll get to more of these games soon. I hope you enjoyed, and check out the video on screen for another incredible game from this tournament. Hope to see you again soon. Cheers.